I'm Rick Wilson. I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight on My 5 Things. I want to jump right into it. We'll try to do some questions on the back end of this, but some of the feedback I had before this started was that folks want to get a perspective from somebody who's been in the political trenches on the side of darkness for a while, and to give you some clear assessments and some understandings of like where I come from, what the thinking about, what the state of our politics is, how to more effectively communicate, and how to do the work of politics in this very, very consequential moment in which we find ourselves. And again, so I appreciate everybody joining. I want to tell you a little bit about myself. I'll make it mercifully short. I am a Florida guy, a 5th generation Floridian. I got into politics purely by accident, although my family was political. A lot of them, half of them were Democrats and half of them were Republicans. But my entry into politics was by accident, and my political early career was a series of dumb political luck moments that led me from being a guy fresh out of school to being a field director for the George Bush 1988, George Herbert Walker Bush's 1988 campaign down in Florida. Learned a hell of a lot in a very short period. Went to DC, briefly worked in the White House Transition Office, and then got snatched away because of some background I had to work in the Department of Defense when this guy you may have heard of named Dick Cheney was the Secretary of Defense. I worked there for 4 very consequential years as the Cold War ended. We thought it ended, as obviously this week is a little, Putin may have different ideas about it ending. Where we fought the right kind of war to liberate Kuwait, and where the world shifted very much under our feet. When Bill Clinton won, I went back to Florida, briefly worked in the state legislature, and then went into full-time campaigning as a career in 1993 and 94. You kind of get trapped in it. Most people spend a couple years in politics and then they say, "Oh dear God, I can't stand this. It's terrifying and horrible." And then they run back to sanity and they rejoin the actual human race. I unfortunately never quite learned that lesson. I stayed in politics, working at increasingly high levels of campaigns and candidates from that moment I left the administration right up until 2015. In 2015, I was a very comfortable, happy Republican consultant. I made a lot of money. I had a comfortable life. I didn't have to work all that hard. I did a lot of very negative ads for super PACs and for candidates. I was the guy you called in to blow stuff up when you needed to blow stuff up. And I guess I was kind of the stereotype of every political consultant, every political hack in the world. But turned out somewhere along the way, I grew a conscience. And when I saw Donald Trump come down those steps, and when I saw what he really represented, the party that I had worked to build and the machine I had worked to create, along with many other people, I recognized that a combination of a man who was that much of a profound narcissist, who lacked any kind of moral compass, would lead it off a cliff very, very quickly. And I said so quietly at first, then loudly, as he grew in power, as he grew in strength in the American political landscape. And I, for whatever reason, could not say, okay, I could not take the bag of silver. I could not shut my mouth. I was told by friends and colleagues and clients, Rick, just go along for the ride. It'll be fine. Trump's not going to be that crazy. It won't be that bad. You're hurting your career. But I knew in my gut and my heart and my head that Donald Trump was an existential threat to the future of this country. And at first it was about, I thought he was a threat to my party. I believed in a sort of Bushian kind of libertarian-ish, free markets, individual liberty, constitutional fealty, and I realized, just as my friend Stuart Stevens writes, it was all a lie. Because every bit of it was a lie. The whole thing was an elaborate prank. And they were waiting for their authoritarian dream date to come along, and sure enough, there was Donald Trump. And so in 2015, I had spoken up, started writing about it. In 2016, I had a hell of a moment. I lost my business. I lost every client I had. I went from a very high flying guy to how am I going to pay the mortgage? How am I going to deal with this? What have I done? But you know what? I never had a moment where I didn't sleep well at night. I never said to myself, wow, I've really screwed this up. I should have just shut up. I knew, again, heart, head, gut, everywhere, that I was doing the right thing. And 2017, I wrote a book. People seemed to like it. It was a New York Times #1 bestseller. And by the way, folks, for all the vicissitudes of this early part of my opposition to Donald Trump, my agent said to me one day, she said, listen, no matter what those bastards do to you, you will never not have New York Times #1 bestseller on your resume. It's a small comfort. But what I wrote about in Everything Trump Touches Dies still had a level of sort of naivety to it. I thought there was still a core inside the Republican Party that could be redeemed. I thought there was something that could be shaken loose from Trumpism. I thought there was a moment we could recapture. I thought something was available to get back to some kind of principled conservatism. Now, look, I grant you, I may have been a small window of that. I was a libertarian, leanish guy. I was never an evangelical. I wasn't a social conservative. I believed in individual liberty. I believed in a strong national security policy. And all those things from the Republican past could be, because they were deeply flawed. Okay, we never lived up to our standards. We never lived up to what we claimed we wanted to do. There were times I was so proud of the party, and there were times I was so ashamed of it. And over the years, I felt there were some cracks inside of it, and I felt there were some rising fears that I had about this wave of populism shaped by Fox, and then in 2016 shaped by Facebook, that was dangerous for the country, dangerous for the party, dangerous for conservatism. And so in all those areas, when I wrote Everything Trump Touches Dies, there was it was a little tongue in cheek. It was a little snarky. And I realized this isn't a joke anymore. Not only is he going to abuse the office, not only is he going to put us in enormous danger as a country, and as a people, we're going to end up with smarter iterations of him going down the line, because no one believes in anything in the Republican Party any longer except the retention of power, the acquisition and retention of power. Nothing else matters. Mitch McConnell the other day said it right out. He'll decide what he'll do when he gets elected. This is a fundamental severing of the traditional social compact with conservatives, which was to say that they believed in limiting the power of the state. They believed in, again, individual liberty. They believed in a free market system. They no longer believe any of that. They have become nationalists. They have become authoritarians. They've become statist in ways that now are the threat we face. And a lot of the things that I've learned over the years about facing that threat, I want to talk to you about tonight. In other news, in terms of my perspective on where we're going, in 2019, I did the greatest thing in my career I've ever done. We took a huge risk. We started a group called the Lincoln Project. It was a group of former Republicans who came together because we wanted to try to unseat Donald Trump, not by writing the 7,462nd op-ed in the Washington Post, or by doing a media hit where you sniffed and said, oh, he's not a real conservative, or he's not a good guy, or he's a danger. No, we wanted to go out and do what we could do with the dark arts. We wanted to go out and assemble a team of people who understood how to win elections amongst our tribe. Because the secret of the Lincoln Project, the secret of politics for me and for our team and for everyone who joined us, was not that we were trying to move 30 million voters or 20 million voters. I didn't have to move 1 million voters in Wisconsin. The targeting let me know that we could win that state if we moved about 70,000 voters in Wisconsin. And the same thing in other states where we worked and were successful. We understood how to drill down into those targets. And people didn't understand how we did it. They didn't understand the approach to it. They saw on the surface of the iceberg that it was up above the waterline, the great viral ads that my team did, the trolling of Donald Trump and the mind games we played with Trump in his campaign. Those are all actually really important things to do. But what was really going on was we were trying to peel away that remnant of Republicans who were uncomfortable with Trump. It was 3 to 8% of the voting population in any given state. And we went and peeled them off. I am enormously proud of the work we did in 2020 with the Lincoln Project, because we set out to do 3 things: to defeat Donald Trump, to remove a number of his enablers from office, and to stop the rise of Trumpism, which is a shorthand for authoritarian populism. Pretty good work on the first front. 4 seats on the second front in Colorado, Arizona, and 2 in Georgia we were pretty happy about. But on the last part, we didn't make it. We didn't stop the rise of Trumpism. It is an organic feature now of populist politics in this country and beyond. And it is something that we believe is enormously dangerous for the future of this country. And I want to talk to you a little bit about how we're going to face up to it as we go forward. So I'm going to switch over to a screen with some notes for a second here. And as you all saw in the course material, and by the way, this is a very top level philosophical approach to some of this. In the Q&A, hopefully we can talk about more of the tactical approaches and the small ball stuff that we need to all work together on to make this effective. One of the things that I believe in, and that the political culture I was raised in has always focused on, is what we call drive the bus, drive the tank. It's FIDO, blank F word, it drive on, FIDO. So you want to always be in forward motion. You want to always be setting the agenda. And that starts by defining your opponent early and often. You want to say who that person is right up front. You want to say who they are. You want to describe them in the ways that peel them off of the voters you need to win. How do we describe Trump to that 3 to 8% of Republican soft voters in 2020? Cruel, racist, dangerous, crazy, selfish, greedy. Do you want your kids to look like that and act like that? So early framing, early definition of your opponent, absolutely vital. If you don't define your opponent early, you will let them do it themselves. And that, for folks on the progressive and Democratic side of the political equation, does not work. I'll give you a perfect example. This year or last year in Virginia, Terry McAuliffe watched Glenn Youngkin win his primary. He bought his primary. He literally stroked a check and bought the Republican Party of Virginia. Terry saw him do that. And then he watched Glenn Youngkin spend $12 million of his own money defining himself as the nice suburban dad in the sweater vest, in the fleece vest. He pretended he wasn't a dangerous ally of Donald Trump. He acted like it would just be business as usual, that he was a technocrat. He was a moderate. He was a good guy. Terry never pushed back on that. He never fought back on that for 12 long weeks. Glenn Youngkin defined himself and defined Terry early. He defined Terry as the guy who was opposed to letting schools reopen, and he defined himself as the nice guy. So you need to take command of campaigns and efforts and messaging things that you are involved in early. You've got to own that space early of who you are and who they are. You've got to talk about them with absolute assertion and clarity. Do not go into this political world today and try to find the good things about the other guy, because I assure you, they will not reciprocate. Try not to believe that the old ways of bipartisanship and comity and friendship and nice guys being, we're all in this together as Americans. We're really not anymore. I mean, I've been talking to a person today who's running for office whose Republican opponent is right now cheerleading for Vladimir Putin against NATO, against the US, basically saying, we should be on the side of Putin. Now, if they don't go out and immediately start hammering this person as somebody who doesn't believe in America, who's a patriot but not on our side, that other person will define the race. This is an iron law now in our politics in this country. You've got to be out early. You've got to take command of the conversation. And I will say this, there is a natural instinct among people in politics to be liked. People want to be liked. They want to be, and I've seen this in more campaigns than I care to recount. They want to be liked. They want to be loved. They want to be appreciated. They want to be told, hey, you're the smartest, tallest, handsomest person in the room. Seeking that attention and that love is something that comes natural to political figures across the spectrum. It's what they want. It's a psychological driver of people who run for office. And that leads them to pull punches. That leads them to not engage. That leads them to not draw the stark and important contrasts with their opponents. Is that nasty? Sometimes. Is it negative? Sometimes. Does it sometimes come across as cruel, or sometimes does it come across as mean? Yeah, it does. But right now, and I'm going to talk about this a lot in a few minutes, right now you're not racing in any campaign, whether it's president or senator or congressman or county commission or school board or dog catcher. Do we still have dog catchers? I don't know if we do. When you are in a race with somebody in politics today, it is going to be a personality contest and a culture contest. Your personality has to be assertive. It has to be more appealing to the people you're targeting in the state or district or office that you're running for. And it has to assert that you believe something. It doesn't work anymore to say, I went to Harvard and I'm a nice guy and I worked on this board, I was on this board and that board, or I'm a great woman business leader and I did this and that. It doesn't work that way anymore. People now believe there's a greater degree of intimacy between themselves and the candidates they support. And that's largely an artifact of social media, where it feels much less isolated and hierarchical than it once did. Because, and I saw this in a focus group a couple of years ago, and this guy said, I didn't like so-and-so, but then he retweeted me. So that sense of intimacy that people demand now, that sense of immediacy with candidates that they demand now, pays off if you are asserting your position, asserting the character, the ideology, the shape of the person who you're running against in terms of what they'll do versus what you'll do. Now, and on both sides of the political equation, when you're asserting something, when you're driving the bus, when you're driving the tank, you want to make sure that you are speaking their language. There's a brilliant writer, not very well known, but he was one of Bill Clinton's chief speechwriters, a guy named David Kusnet, Kusnet, has a great little book called Speaking American. And part of asserting these days, part of communicating these days is speaking American. It is being clear with people. It is being direct with people. And that doesn't mean you're always going to go out and tell them everything that's in your heart or your mind or your agenda. But it does mean that you treat them with clarity and respect. And if you don't, the penalties for that now in this social mediated world are enormous, and they're dangerous, and they really will put people behind the political curve very, very quickly. And if you're running a race, or if you're helping a candidate in a race, you're going to discover that when you're in control, when you're doing the work, when you're telling people what the agenda is, what the race looks like, what the other candidate is, who they are, what their character is, what their beliefs are, and you're asserting those things, you will feel better. You'll feel better if you're working on a campaign or volunteering on a campaign when it's happening. You'll feel better as a candidate. We assert things at the Lincoln Project frequently. We do not sit back and wait for the agenda to come to us. We go out and make the agenda happen. When Donald Trump was riding very, very high in December, January, and February of 2019 and 2020, we started beating on him psychologically to change the subject, to make him pay attention to us. Why did we do that? We asserted something. We asserted to Donald Trump that his campaign was in trouble. We narrowcast it to him, by the way, that his campaign manager was stealing from him, that people were laughing at him, that he was a mockery. What did he do? He fired his campaign manager. We couldn't have done that if we sat there and said, well, let's just wait for the first debate. Let's just see what happens. Let's just hold on until something goes, something pops up we can exploit or leverage against. We didn't believe in that. And we never have. We never do. We are always out seeking the opportunities. We are trying to entrepreneurially create political spaces where we can be effective in terms of changing the dialogue politically in the country, and in terms of making certain that you don't let the other guy have an open field to run it. And the other dirty little secret was, we may have some Elizabeth Warren fans on the call tonight. God bless you. She's very smart. But one of the reasons we went out there and just went hard was after one of the Democratic debates, she said to a reporter, this was a great debate. No one mentioned Donald Trump once. We realized these were people that were going to wait. Just like the Republican field in 2016, all in their heads said, I'll be the last one standing and I'll take out Trump. Do not have a failure of imagination about how bad things can be. And the best way to keep yourself from having that failure of imagination is to play through all those exercises and then strike your own course, do your own thing, assert, drive the bus. So I want to talk about my least favorite subject, and that is policy. God bless policy people. I love you to death. I adore you. You believe in things, you study them, you learn more about them than I will ever know. You look at the polling and you say, my gosh, people really, really want us to talk about X in this campaign. In 30 years of this, in 30 years, I have been presented by pollsters with 100 most important problem panels, as they call them. What do you think is the most important problem in this race? Jobs, the economy, climate, guns, abortion. They go through the list. At the end of the day, in this country, policy does not win elections. People will argue about this with me all day long, but I have studied this, I have watched this, I have seen this 100 times. When Barack Obama ran for president, he had two brilliant policy positions that fit on a poster: hope, change. Donald Trump ran for president, he had one policy position: revenge. He told the aggrieved, for whatever damn reason, the aggrieved white middle class, I am the tribune of your anger. I will take revenge on the elites, on the smart people. Bill Clinton was going to connect with people. Policy, you can write all the policy papers you want. You can present brilliantly articulated policy arguments time and time and time again. They do not move voters. And I'll tell you why. First off, the people who write policy are smart. They are from good schools and they have thought these things through, and they really, really want to articulate effective positions that will achieve an end. They want to reduce carbon per billion in the atmosphere. And so they'll write a 700-page document for the candidate. They want to get healthcare costs down, and so they'll write a 700-page document for the candidate. Those documents may be full of incredibly meritorious ideas and policies and prescriptions for the country. They may be right on target. They may be exactly what we can and should and must do. However, that problem of Democrats, that idea that Democrats have, particularly Democrats, that they're going to go out and win a race on policy, is what kills them. You know what? If you write a 700-page healthcare paper and I'm a Republican consultant, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to get 10 nerds to go through that healthcare paper. And I'm going to have those 10 nerds find 10 things that scare the crap out of grandma. And then I'm going to put that out there on social media and paid media. And I'm going to say, candidate Jane Smith wants to take away your health care. She wants to force your doctor to work in an empty barn. She wants you to not be able to eat a hamburger. You know, all those things that are ridiculous, ludicrous lies, but that can be somehow wedged and massaged and jacked into some sort of vague semblance of a message. If you haven't seen the Republicans do this, I would direct your attention to the last 25 years, 30 years of American politics. I've been one of those guys who would send a research nerd out to read, you know, the giant policy paper and find the things that scare people, because Republicans don't believe in anything except victory. And in 2022, it's more true than it's ever been. In 2020, not a single policy idea that Joe Biden ever surfaced, other than I'm a decent guy and I'm not that guy, mattered. None of it moved the numbers. People will tell you, oh, we're going to win on prescription drugs. We're going to win on climate. We're going to win on gun control. You're not. It's a personality contest. It's a social orientation contest. It's now become something that is post-policy on both sides. People win because of charisma. People win because of articulation of values. People win because they're able to communicate to voters and to viewers, because now this is an audience game, what they are and what they believe, without having to drill down into every detail. And I'll tell you this too. I've sat in a million focus groups. I've probably been in more focus groups than all but about 3 or 4 people in the country. I have spent many nights of my life behind the glass. And I'll tell you why voters in those focus groups say they care about policy. And it's a secret. They're lying. There's a thing in politics called the socially desirable response. And the socially desirable response is when a pollster asks you a question, or when you're asked a question in a focus group, you think you should answer a certain way, and therefore you do. And I'm not a sociologist by any stretch of the imagination. It's one of the imaginary sciences. But sorry, any sociologists in the audience. But it is one of those things that occurs over and over again. It's a known effect of focus groups. And so, and polling. So they will tell you, I care about X, I believe in Y, and their voting behavior is at variance with it time and time and time again. Now, Republicans got that way back in like 1994. They figured out that voters will tell you one thing on paper and believe a different thing. That different thing is that they're going to vote based on a whole bunch of social cues and cultural cues. And as we've gone into 2020 and now into 2022 and coming up on 2024, the country has bifurcated, where there are very few votes in the middle. There are very few people who are willing to say, I'm going to vote based on policy. I'm going to vote based on something that I really care about. Yeah, there are some. I grant you there are some. But a lot of the times people say, okay, my biggest issue is climate. And then they'll vote on jobs or education. So we see this a lot. Republicans got this a long time ago. And because the country's bifurcated, we are now now all policies are seen as avatars of a cultural orientation. All policy is now seen as, from the right, all policy now, folks on the right now view all policy as a way to oppress them, whether it's good for them or not. You know, Joe Biden could come out tomorrow and say, hey, we've found a cure for pancreatic cancer. And Republicans would say, well, no, that's not acceptable. You're trying to force us to get a cure for pancreatic cancer. How dare you impinge on our freedom? And you think that's a weird and like overdone argument, but it's happening all around you right now. People dying of Omicron are Republicans. They're dying of Omicron because they live in a culture that has taught them now that oppositional defiant disorder for everything, including getting freaking vaccines, which is something that is not, you know, a scientifically dubious area, It's not some mystical thing we've never heard of before. But their culture now is telling them, don't get vaccinated. Don't comply. And so if you don't see these things as a cultural fight and you do see it as a policy fight, I have variations on this theme, but you're bringing in Etsy throw pillow to a gunfight. You do not want to be the person who goes into a campaign and thinks you're going to rely on policy to win. I'm going to tell you, the 2020 election was one thing only. It was a referendum on Donald Trump. That's it. It's a referendum on Donald Trump. More of this or no more of this. As we go into 2022, we are going to have a referendum on something. Now, we don't know what it is yet. I would like it to be a referendum on whether we're going to be a democratic republic. I would like it to be a referendum on whether or not this country is going to believe in things like the law, the Constitution, individual liberty. I know you hear me say that a lot, but I'm a big believer in it. Or are we going to be a country that believes in the strong man, the man on the horse, the authoritarian? I would like that to be the frame and the predicate for the 2022 election. Republicans want it to be a predicate on culture war, on Antifa, on critical race theory, on communism, on all this catalog of imaginary demons that populate their nightmare landscape. And they're very good at convincing those people that those imaginary demons are very, very real. And so when the Democratic candidate is talking about infrastructure policy, they're able to whisper to their people, no, what he wants is for all the Mexicans to come and kill your family and take your job. And they do that without shame or any degree of hesitation anymore. And I mean, and that is a true deviation from, and look, folks, if you're a Democrat for the last 30 years, you disagreed a lot of the time, I am sure, with Ronald Reagan or George Herbert Walker Bush or George W. Bush. I'm sure you disagree with them on a million different things. But I bet you never thought, hey, that guy wakes up every morning and wants to eat children in a pizza restaurant. A lot of Republicans believe that stuff now. They believe it because they've been in this hermetically sealed cultural bubble. They believe it because they live in this world now that is so divergent from reality that trying to convince them, trying to move them by saying, hey, we're gonna reduce carbon parts per billion, we're gonna clean up the water here, we're gonna protect the national parks, we're gonna increase teacher salaries. None of that works anymore. Wish it did. I wish we were a country where the fights were going to be over, hey, is the marginal tax rate going to be 38.5% or 32.6%? I wish it was going to be, are we going to have 600 parts per billion or 200 parts per billion? I don't know I'm not a scientist. So, in the atmosphere, I would love for those fights to be the fights we were having. Those would be fights a mature country has. But unfortunately, we have now entered a very different period in our politics. And so with all that, don't rely on policy. I was not relying on policy for a long time, way before, we entered the current political hellscape. And we won a lot of races based on that. There were very few races that I can point to where a policy or a law or something a candidate proposed what mattered. And I'll tell you one last reason on that about voters in this country, left and right. They're deeply cynical. And they're deeply cynical for a reason. On the right, they've been told for years, if we just lower taxes a little bit more, all the jobs in your Midwest steel town will come back. If we just give the Kochs a little more juice, if we just give another tax break to real estate developers, if we just give one more bump to folks who are in the hedge fund industry, then everything will trickle downhill. It's a big lie. It's a big, big lie. We don't have free markets in this country. We have crony capitalism writ large and a kleptocracy in the making. And that is, as somebody, I view that as a profoundly conservative view of the economy, not the sort of like pretend thing. And folks on the left, they're skeptical of promises from the left because they've heard for generations If you just let us have 75 more regulations about this and 5,000 more bureaucrats to do that, and this program and that program, all your life will be great. You're all going to be holistic windmill repairmen, and you're going to make $200,000 a year. There is a huge skepticism about promises and policy, and both sides of the political equation in this country have led us there, and the financial system of this country has led us there. And it's important to understand just how we got here. And I could talk for hours on this particular nugget, but I want to move on to the next part of this and say to my Democratic friends, when a Republican makes an assertion about you, for the love of God, take a beat. I'll give you another example from Virginia. Glenn Youngkin comes out and says, Terry McAuliffe believes in critical race theory, which teaches kids to hate America. Instead of accepting the predicate of something that ludicrous, Terry caught the grenade and held on to it and said, I'm going to give him a cogent, clear, I'm going to walk around this problem. We're going to talk it through. We're going to have a discussion about it. We're going to make something serious here. And then the grenade blew up in his face. Time and time and time again, Republicans will say things like, you want to defund the police, which, by the way, God bless James Clyburn, who said that was the dumbest thing he'd ever heard. And there was another word in between dumbest and ever. And the Republicans are masters of this. Make an assertion, say that you believe in X, and Democrats will go, and I call it the dorm room problem. Republicans say, you're a communist. And the Democrat will go, well, true communism has never been true. And the grenade blows up in their face. Stop it. Over and over again. For 30 years, I've been throwing things across the other side of the aisle, and I'm stunned. And I've been stunned 100 times that you set a trap, and you literally say to the Democrats, this is the trap. If you step in this trap, the iron jaws are going to close around your leg and you're going to be in excruciating pain. And yet they wander in, clank, and they're stuck. You know, when you accept a predicate in an argument, watch somebody on TV who's really, really good on TV. Watch people who are really good on TV. And a hostile reporter will say, you are a corrupt bastard. Now, a bad person, a person who's not good at responding to that sort of thing will go, I'm not a corrupt bastard. But you've just repeated the assertion and repeated the language and repeated the charge. So I'll give you an example on how to handle it. How Terry should have handled it in Virginia. How Democrats should handle it across the country in these school board races right now. It's to turn the attack back on the attacker. So if a Republican says, you favor critical race theory and you want to teach kids to hate America, you don't say things like, well, critical race theory isn't taught in schools. It's an obscure legal theory. And no, stop. What you say to the Republican is, well, you just want to say the N-word, right? That's what you want. You want to be able to say the N-word. That's what you really want, isn't it? Push the argument back. They're going to be outrageous and transgressive. You must push it back right in their face, right up in their grill, day one, hour one, minute one, and never let them get away with stuff like that. Right now, Democrats are being hammered by Republicans. They're saying, you've done nothing about inflation. Well, they're saying, well, there's not anything we can do about inflation. And the way to respond to that right now is to say, your boy Trump spent like a drunken sailor, left us in COVID with a gigantic economic crisis, and it's on him and it's on you. And is it? I can make arguments either way, but the fact is, if you don't recalibrate the assertion and push it back on the other guy, if you catch the grenade and hold on to it and examine it, look at it and go, oh, this is really lumpy and it's ticking and it's boom. If you keep doing that, believe me, they'll always throw another one. They will always push another one over and over and over again. You know, fire with fire is an argument that people are hesitant to make in politics also, because like, I don't want to be hated. I don't want to be an asshole. I don't want to be the person that people think is a jerk. I don't want to be the guy. Well, guess what? Political philosopher named Lee Atwater one time said, you want to be the jerk, or you want to be the honorable jerk who has that office on Capitol Hill? Because Capitol Hill is full of jerks. It's full of people who run hard races and do the hard things to get there. And, you know, politics is not a Montessori school. It is not Los Feliz daycare. It is not hugs and kisses and kumbaya. It is a Darwinian experiment of people and persuasion. So that idea that you don't take an argument from somebody in their terms and their phrasing, it's fundamental. It's fundamental in law and in writing and on TV, and of course it's utterly fundamental in politics. Now, I want to say this: the folks in political life who look at an argument and again revert back to the previous problem, which is the policy problem, and say, well, I will overcome this ludicrous assertion by telling you what bills I've passed, or I will overcome this ludicrous assertion by telling you what bills I'm going to pass. Voters, again, are skeptical. They're watching for weakness all the time. And this is a strength test. The grenade catching problem is a strength test. If you are not strong, voters know it. If you don't believe if you don't assert what you believe, voters know it. If you're fearful or on D, they know it. And that goes back to rule 1. Do not be on defense. Drive forward all the time. So I want to speak for a moment about ads in particular, because these days ads are how assertions are made. Now, when I was a wee lad, ads were basically run on broadcast television and radio, and a little bit of cable in the beginning. In 1988, we had a little bit of cable, but not as a giant driver in the equation. The ad market has evolved radically in the last few years. A lot of people are like, oh, Lincoln Project raised $100 million and you spent 85% of it on voter contact, but you only spent 20% of it on broadcast TV or cable TV. Yeah, you're right. You know why? Shit doesn't work anymore like it used to. Used to be able, I could put 2,000 gross rating points of TV up in a community somewhere, and I could elect Osama bin Laden if you had that much TV coming out of their ears. It changed people immediately. The audience is now scattered. It's now much more diverse. It's now much more ideologically fragmented. And so, the advertising you're going to see asserting these messages is going to be much more calibrated, and you have to push back in a lot of different spaces. So, you're going to be tempted to try to swat down every fly. Don't be tempted to do that. Sometimes they want you to chase the rabbit all around the field. Sometimes they're trying to get you to run after every assertion they make, and try to defend yourself with their audiences where you shouldn't defend yourself. If you're a Democratic candidate running in almost any congressional seat in the country that's even close, like plus or minus 5 points, 7 points, either way, do not go out and try to win over the Breitbart audience. Do not try to win over the crazy lady on Facebook who tells you that, COVID has 5G chips and Luciferase to let the mark of the beast be in your body. You do want to focus your arguments and your responses and your flip arounds on these arguments on your movable voters, on people who are actually gettable. And I do want to say one other thing about this in terms of the messaging thing. I have to tell my Democratic friends this a lot. And they wonder, like, how did Republicans make these massive gains across the country? Was it gerrymandering? No, had a little bit to do with it in some states. I will grant you that. What it really was that Republicans made a decision to give their candidates moral flexibility. And so I helped elect a Republican governor in Vermont 4 times. Was he a perfect conservative? Absolutely not. Not even close, okay? He was squishy, according to Republican logic, on everything: healthcare, choice, climate, everything. But the question we used to push back on was, well, do you want a Republican governor or a Democratic governor? You make the call. It's up to you. And this is not exactly in my pride cabinet anymore. Once upon a time, I helped elect this guy, mayor of New York City, who was big on cleaning up the place and restoring the economy. Now he's, of course, the weird guy at Four Seasons Total Landscaping with the goo dripping down his head, who is selling 9/11 t-shirts. But, was he a perfect Republican? No, he was a pro-choice liberal Republican. But Republicans didn't say a word about it because they wanted a Republican mayor. Democrats often have an ideological homogeneity about them where they want to insist on every candidate being like every other candidate. In 2018, Democrats won 41 seats with a bunch of candidates who were not AOC. They were not perfect progressives on every single axis. Some of them ran on, to the center of their Republican opponents very smartly in those districts. They were able to win that way. Republicans will do that. They will play the game. They will pretend to do that. And so part of throwing grenades at them is making them own the crazy. Mitch McConnell is going to do a lot of work this year to try to convince voters in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and other places, Arizona, that they found the moderate Senate candidate. They found the middle of the road person. They're not going to be, it's not a crazy Trump or conspiracy theory lunatic. Great way to throw grenades at them is to make them own all of it. Any Republican candidate who answers the question truthfully at all, was Donald Trump legitimately elected, or Joe Biden legitimately elected, or was Donald Trump legitimately elected? Watch them squirm. They have to fear their base now. Democrats have always had to fear their progressive base, but Republicans have to fear their base. It's a leverage point that I really encourage folks to use as we go forward. Okay, moving on to the next part of this. I said earlier that politics is not a Montessori school. And I've drawn a picture for you of politics that is unbelievably, this Machiavellian struggle, this Darwinian battle all the time. One of the things that made my career, I think, successful and has made our organization, the Lincoln Project, very successful, is having a little bit of fun with it. This is not a world that penalizes you for having a sense of humor. This is not a world that penalizes you for having, for being transgressive anymore. They do not expect everybody to walk around in a suit and tie and sit down at a table and walk through the 600-page policy document. They want to see people who are authentic and genuine. Why do people like me on TV? I don't know. It's certainly not my looks, but it's probably because they know I'm going to say something smart-assed. They know I'm going to be very genuine. They know I'm going to tell you exactly what's on my mind. They know occasionally I'm going to drop the F-bomb on live national television. It happens. But it's actually, there's actually, the changes in politics have actually given rise to an area where we can have a little more fun than we used to, where you're not required, like I said, to all be the suit and tie gang every day. And I don't think I've worn a suit in like forever. I think at my daughter's wedding, I wore this last time I wore a suit about 6 months ago. But, we have a little more fun these days. And when leaders show that they're having a little bit of fun, it's the old Hubert Humphrey line of a happy warrior. And you want to have happy warriors, not only in your campaign as at the candidate level, but with your volunteers and your staff. Yes, we are in a shitty, horrible moment in this country's history. We are fighting for our lives to save democracy in this country. But in the words of my beloved departed grandmother, even gallows humor is humor. You ought to have some fun with this stuff. And I will say this, authoritarians hate mockery. They cannot abide it. They are paralyzed by it. They utterly despise it in every way. And it is why, one of my special gifts was knocking Donald Trump around, because he is an egregious man when it comes to his ego being damaged. Making fun of him, insulting the way insulting the pomposity and grandiosity of Trump was something that I absolutely think that Democrats didn't get. Republicans tried to get it in 2016 at the very, very end. Marco a little bit, Cruz a little bit, but they both couldn't get out of the old world that they lived in. They couldn't get out of the consultocracy that said, "Dear God, how dare you be so frivolous?" It's a different world now. Have some fun with it. I mean, we ran a lot of ads last year that were what we call for the audience of one. And we developed this strategy. This had never been done in politics before, never been done in campaigns before, where ads were designed, written, and then distributed in a hyper-targeted way just to get to Donald Trump. If Donald Trump was in the White House, we knew it. And therefore, the 20036 zip code and a whole bunch of devices we had the MEIs for, and a whole bunch of offices we knew we could target digitally and on cable, they got bombed with this stuff. We knew Trump was sitting home at night in the residence in the White House with his little TiVo clicker watching Tucker. So of course we ran ads during Tucker. We did them to get in his head. So that audience of one thing, that psychological warfare thing, where you're having fun with the other guy and enraging them. I mean, how did I get Donald Trump to fire his campaign manager? Because we sat around one day and we strategized out an ad that showed girls in bikinis dancing on a yacht and Ferraris in a driveway. And we told Donald Trump, that's what Brad Parscale's doing to you. He's taking all your money, Donald. They fired him. We were able to always get inside of his head. And you can't do that if you think like an old-fashioned campaign, because there are multiple targets now in all these races. Why is it I drag Ted Cruz all the time? Why do I drag Josh Hawley all the time? Why do I drag Tom Cotton all the time? And why do I drag Ron DeSantis all the time? He fucking deserves it. Oops, excuse me, sorry. See, I dropped the occasional F-bomb. What happens with all those folks? What happens in all those cases is you end up eventually personalizing the race with them. You end up eventually making them pay attention to you. And I will tell you, in the 2020 race, we knew we had a source in the White House and we had a source in the campaign. Cheers, and both of them got away with it. They never got caught. Who told us very directly that Donald Trump had become obsessed with what we were saying about him. He was watching the ads. He was angry about the ads. And a lot of the books that have been written now about this have affirmed that, which I'm kind of proud of. But we were having fun doing it. It was like, it gave people that followed us and that supported us a sense of fighting spirit. And my Democratic friends, God love you, but I'm going to use I'm going to speak Southern for a minute. Get your dicks out of the dirt. You've got to lift up. You can have fun doing this. You don't have to say everything is this, scoldy, judgy tone. You can mock the bad guys because they hate it and it works. Their audience has now been conditioned to expect that the Republican type of leader is an aggressive a-hole all the time, who's always going to hurt people, insult people, and be the macho man in the room. We made a joke last year in an ad about the size of Trump's equipment. It wasn't even a subtle joke. We did it because we knew he was watching. We want to grind away at their ego. We want to make them pay attention. And we picked up the tempo of that sort of advertising and messaging. And you'll figure out the reason in about 5 seconds after I tell you when. As the Democratic primary was winding down and everybody was out of money and out of ideas and exhausted, and the field was narrowing and narrowing and narrowing, we started hammering Trump on a bunch of psychological fronts and having a lot of fun with it. I mean, what we had some ads that I watched today and I crack up watching. They weren't for voters, they were for him. The ads for voters look very different. But we did it so we could buy Joe Biden space and time. When Joe Biden got the nomination, he had less than $1 million in the bank. So we spent 4 or 5 weeks out there blowing up everything we could, having a blast going after the bad guys so he would pay attention to us. And he did. He yelled at us, he tweeted at us, he sent his flying monkey minions after us. And I gotta say, it was a great time because we were being effective and it was fun. A friend of mine I talked to one time, he's a fighter pilot. And I said, all the work, I'm a pilot, but not a fighter pilot. I said, all the work you put into it, all that stuff, is very little, chance of you going out there and actually fighting the bad guys. He goes, listen, you just go out there and you have fun. You go out there because it's fast and it's loud and it's like nothing else in the world. Being in a battle with a bad person. And guys, in this 2022 cycle, you will have an embarrassing number of bad people you can go after. I mean, an embarrassing number. It will stagger, it will boggle your mind how many bad people you can talk to and go after. I mean, if you're not waking up every morning, if you're in Ohio and you're not waking up every morning thinking about a way to drag Josh Mandel or JD Vance, you are not living right. So, like I said, don't worry about everything you're doing. Go out and you follow that happy warrior mentality. Follow that sense of spontaneity and some joy in the work, because there should be some joy in the work. It is not 20 years ago or 30 years ago or 50 years ago. People don't reward the same things they used to reward in the political space that they do now. So I want to say a little bit about Democratic morale. And one of the greatest failings, I think, of the Democratic Party as it's constituted today. Number one, leadership really, really matters inside the party, and they don't have any. If Mitch McConnell was drunk, blindfolded, and hit in the head with a hammer, he will still out-politic Chuck Schumer 9 days out of 10, probably 99 days out of 100. If you look at this, the Democratic Congressional Committee, the Senate Committee, the Governors Association, if you look at the state party committees, I'm going to be honest with you, most of them cannot organize a 2-car motorcade. They are not good at this work. I don't know what they're good at, but they're not good at the work. And leadership in the Democratic Party is something that absolutely matters. And it's something that they've got to work on. We've tried to be at the Lincoln Project, and I've tried to be essentially like a special operations team where we'll go blow up a hole in the wall and everybody else needs to charge in and get to work. We'll go distract the bad guys while you guys do the hard work. And sometimes that works, but mostly the leadership in Washington, in the committees, they focus group everything until it's dead and meaningless. They'll take, I'll tell you a dirty little secret about Lincoln Project. You know how many ads we focus grouped out of the 305 pieces of video content we put out into 2020? Zero. Not one. You know why? Didn't matter. Assert. But what happens in Washington with the Democratic committees is they will take an ad and they will say, okay, let's write an ad on X or Y issue, and then we'll focus group it. And one person in the focus group will say, well, I don't know, should that have been a Hispanic man or a black man in that who said that? And then they'll go back out and they'll remake the ad and they'll focus group it again. And they'll say, well, should he be wearing a yellow shirt or a green shirt? And they'll go back and find a guy with a green shirt. And they will eventually reduce the ad into a mass of vanilla pudding. It will not be memorable. It will not be viral. It will not be persuasive. All those things come from leadership. And everybody's covering their rear ends. Everybody's hiding from accountability, responsibility. They're hiding from, do I want to be out there and be the one who runs the big ad that shifts the battlefield? No one wants to do that on the Democratic side. It's I don't understand it. I've talked to a lot of candidates, I've talked to a lot of consultants, and there's a sense of caution and a sense of depression. But yeah, let me tell you, this little story from the thing. Republicans get to the X. They want to win. They don't care about any other thing except the victory itself. So they will go out and they will try to select the right candidates. They will use the right messages. They will have the right approach in the different districts and states. It doesn't always work. It works more times that it works a lot. The odds of it working are higher than it should be. Now, the leadership problem is enormous. I've observed it it's been corroding, honest answer, since Bill Clinton, where the committees had to separate themselves from Clinton when he was in the middle of his crisis. And then when Barack Obama won, Obama was such a singular candidate, such a persuasive candidate. He had so much presence and charisma and became this enormously powerful brand that no one else could imitate him. You could not imitate Barack Obama. You couldn't. He had a presence in our politics that, and I know this is a weird analogy for some people, it was the same thing with Ronald Reagan, where he was a singular kind of character. At the time, it's not a perfect analogy, but it's damn close. And so Barack Obama kind of weakened the Democratic bench in a lot of ways because he was so big. He was so persuasive. He had such a way of becoming the superstar in the room. So those committees with the leadership problems, like I said, I've been watching it for a long time. I don't have an immediate fix for it other than, get your S in one basket and get your act together and start fighting smartly. I did write a book about this in 2018. For the 2020 cycle about how to beat Trump, but it's got a lot of lessons in it. Running against the devil, it's got a lot of lessons in it for how Democrats can win, not just against Trump, but against Republicans. But the leadership problem is only one thing the Democrats face. They also face a loyalty problem. And right now, the circular firing squad in the Democratic Party, I have never seen it as bad as it is today. I have never seen so much willful self-destruction as I have today. From the moderates, Sinema and Manchin, who are single-handedly Mitch McConnell's biggest allies in DC right now, causing enormous embarrassment to the president, enormous setbacks to the agenda, to AOC and the squad, who say what's on their minds, and they are all from the safest possible Democratic districts, and they think that everything they do and say criticizing Biden won't hurt Biden out in the country, where he needs to have more strength than he does right now. So the messaging problem and the loyalty problem go hand in hand. If a Republican, if the White House woke up one morning, if Karl Rove woke up one morning and said, message of the day is that monkeys invented cotton candy, every Republican would be out there saying, yep, those monkeys, man, they made cotton candy. It's delicious cotton candy. We take credit for it. Those are our monkeys and we love them. Every single one of them, top to bottom. They have a cohesive messaging ecosystem, and I could describe it for you in a variety of ways. One way is the human centipede, which we'll skip on this family discussion, but the other way is a flow. That messaging flows bi-directionally. It comes down from the White House or from whoever the leader of the party is. Right now, that is Donald Trump, the forever leader. May he live for all eternity, as they say, in the Republican world. And from the grassroots craziness. So if somebody on a weird Facebook group says, Joe Biden is wearing the skin of a dead woman, they will immediately start spreading that rumor. And by the end of the day, Fox will run stories about, is Joe Biden a cannibal with a skin suit? On the other hand, when Steve Bannon decides, as the sort of chief messaging architect of the nationalist populist movement, that he's going to say that critical race theory and Antifa, are all signs of a coming race war. Well, they're all going to suddenly say, down to that Facebook level by the end of the day, yeah, there's a race war coming. We better protect ourselves from those people. I helped build it. I helped push it. I admit it. I'm not proud of it. I've been working hard to undo it. But don't underestimate it. Don't ever underestimate it. And Democrats believe, okay, we've got MSNBC and we've got maybe CNN sometimes, and we've got, the New York Times and the traditional media. Well, let me tell you something about the traditional media. They are not liberal. They individually may be liberal, but the traditional media is much more cultural about Washington, D.C., and they love both sidesism, and they love the game of Republicans say, Democrats say, even though right now it's Republicans say we should burn down our republic and replace it with a monarchy. Democrats that's how the traditional media looks at it. They play for access. They play for first cut at stories. Don't expect them to be the saving grace. But I will say this, it's important also for Democrats to sell the win. And they don't do it. They're terrible at it. The minute the infrastructure bill passed, Joe Biden should have been in 100 cities, and surrogates from the administration and members of Congress should have been out cutting damn ribbons. They should have been out there claiming victory, declare victory and assert victory. They never do this on policy. They feel defensive, and they also feel very frequently like, oh, well, we didn't produce exactly what we wanted, therefore the best will be the enemy of the good. I heard a lot of progressives on the infrastructure bill absolutely angry. And what was their first thing right out of the gate when it passed? Well, we're not going to vote for Build Back Better because we didn't get what we wanted. Okay, that's a logic, but it's not actual political logic. But again, this is the kind of thing that I want to encourage everybody to really consider on selling and asserting goodness and victory. Now, I finally want to talk about one other thing, and then I'll try to answer some questions here as we go. I believe passionately in small d democratic freedoms. I believe that this country, for all of our flaws at the outset, for all the compromises that we had to make, for all the pain and sweat and tears and setbacks, that we have slowly bent the arc, that we can be that shining city on the hill, that we can be a nation that is inspiring, that is great not in the blustery Trumpian, facile way that they believe greatness is comprised. But I believe it's a country that can be that beacon in the world. I believe in that in my gut, in my heart. I believe it in the most profound possible way. We are entering 2 election cycles that will decide the future. I don't want to scare people, but there are a lot of folks on the right, people I used to know, people I used to be friends with, who have accepted completely that Donald Trump and Trumpism and nationalist populism are the future. And even if Donald Trump tomorrow was eaten by a shark, fell in the water off Mar-a-Lago and was eaten by a shark, the cancer of Trumpism and the cancer of nationalism, the cancer of populism will survive. And it is something that the fight against is so important that, it led me and a lot of folks like me to walk away from careers, lives, friendships, and take on this fight. But it's not a fight that requires somebody like me or Stuart or Reed or Joe or any of the people on my team. You don't need 30 years of experience in politics to be in politics. You don't need a lifetime of grinding away in the salt mines of political consulting or political life to understand how important the moment we live in is. And that moment is enormously consequential. There are a lot of Republicans who would like to just go ahead and skip the election stuff altogether. Why are they passing these bills in the states that say we get to decide who counts the vote? We get to decide if that vote count is legitimate or not. We get to decide who can vote when they can vote. We get to decide whether or not we like the neighborhood you're in. We get to decide whether you can bring somebody a bottle of water at a polling place. And by the way, I plan to be arrested in Georgia this year by bringing voters bottles of water. I plan on it. This is a civil rights battle of our time. But why are they doing that? Because the model of the Republican Party of the future isn't the Republican Party of the past. It's the Ba'ath Party in Iraq, where every 2 years there were things that looked like elections. Every 2 years there were things that appeared to be elections. They weren't elections. The dear leader would win with 105% of the vote. The Ba'ath Party would win all 298 seats in the legislative body. Because Republicans do not believe in anything now except power and its retention, that's the kind of future they want. That's the landscape they want to see. It does not have to be that way. There are more of us than there are of them. There are more Americans who still believe that this country means something, that this beautiful propositional nation means something bigger, that it's not about white outrage. It's not about an organized propaganda network that convinces 80 million Americans every night that they're the ones who are being suppressed and oppressed and that they deserve their vengeance. They're not the ones who who believe that unless your folks came over on the Mayflower at some point, that you're not really an American. The propositional nature of this country remains for me like the most inspiring thing. It's one of the reasons I get up every day and get in this fight. And I love the fight. Okay. I've loved it for 30 years, but for a long time, I didn't feel great about it. I feel great about it. I sleep great at night. I get up in the morning and I swing that battle axe at bad guys every day, and I freaking love it. I hope that folks that are watching tonight will get involved politically. I hope you'll start thinking about like where you can be effective in state and local races. Look, people ask me all the time, like, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? How can I be involved? What can I do to make a difference? What can I say, in my community? The first step is always the big one. It's going out there. Go volunteer to campaign, go register, go raise money for people. And people from every spectrum are going to be on this event tonight. Apparently we have about 900 people tonight. People from every part of life, every walk of life will have a skill. I mean, one of the things we just built out just recently was a thing called the Union, because the Lincoln Project, we're good at what we do. We're great at psychological warfare. We're great at advertising. We're great at messing with the bad guys. We're great at moving Republican voters. But I'm not a voter. I'm not a voter registration organization. I'm not a lawyer. We don't have that. I mean, we have some of those inside. But so we built this thing called the Union that we're going to launch. And basically, it's like, what's your skill set? What do you do? What do you do? What is your thing that you're good at? And we're helping not just match them with campaigns, but with other organizations out in the States. So we started it. We signed up, I think, about 40,000 people in the first couple of days, and about 150 lawyers, 140 something lawyers. And so we're now going to be able to say, okay, if we have to challenge ballot access in Georgia, we've got 6 lawyers in Georgia. we're gonna turn them loose, and we're gonna point them at groups like Mark Elias's group or others that can use that sort of manpower and firepower. Folks, every one of you has a damn skill. Some of you don't even know what it is, but you're good at something. Had an email just before I came online here tonight. I mean, 2 minutes before I came on here, from a guy who said, you know, I don't do a lot, but I'm a composer. I'd love to help. I'll do it pro bono. Tell me a campaign that needs music for their ads. It's a small thing. It seems small. It seems like a tiny little thing. Like, who cares on one level? But you should care, because engaging with that kind of passion is what can turn this around. Being in this fight with joy and assertion and aggression is what can turn this around. And if we don't turn this around, we may be looking at the last real elections in 2024. And I don't mean to be a downer and end this on a down note, but that's a true thing. It's a hard thing to talk about, but it's real. All right, folks, I'm going to answer some questions now, because I have some questions from people. I keep hearing the poll numbers look scary for Democrats in the midterm. With our democracy in the balance, it gives me great pause. Regarding polls, I've never been polled, not once. So I'm not an expert. For 2022, which polls do you have the most confidence in? None at all. Polling is broken. It's not completely broken, unless you're using enormously large data sets, drawn from the voter file, cross-checked and vetted very extensively. But if you see an online poll, I beg you do what I do. Close your eyes, click the X on the window, or click the red dot on the window, and get rid of it. Online polls from Twitter and Facebook, for the love of God, please don't. Look, there are decent pollsters out there. I don't want to go through the list right now, but unless it's a poll of likely voters drawn from the voter file in the state or district, it is fundamentally going to be dodgy. Don't ever look at a poll of registered voters or all of adults. It's just garbage. Okay. Let's see. Have you looked at considered involvement with other ground level orgs? Yes, that's what I was just talking about. Because the Lincoln Project, we were one of the largest and fastest growing super PACs in the country. We have this enormous footprint of millions of followers. We're working with a lot of other groups right now already. And again, we built this thing called the Union so we could integrate, so we can also let other groups use our sort of mouthpiece and our megaphone to push voters into that. So yeah, we will be working with folks in a bunch of states. And there's been a lot of questions about what states we're interested in 2022. I will tell you, folks, pay attention to Pennsylvania, pay attention to Ohio, Wisconsin, Arizona, and although for the Senate races, and although I supported Marco when he ran the first time, I was one of the only people that supported him when he was at 3%, and helped push him over in the first race. I think Val Demings has a better than average shot in Florida. It's kind of surprising, but keep an eye on Val. She's damn good people. But yeah, the big races to watch. I mean, Ohio and Pennsylvania are two states that have been in great flux. They will be enormously important in the Senate race. And I think we've got good Democratic candidates in both Ohio and Pennsylvania this year. I think Tim Ryan is exceptional. And we'll see how in Pennsylvania, the advantage of Pennsylvania is essentially I could move to Pennsylvania and run against Dr. Oz and the mutant parade that's running on the Republican side. It's going to be quite spectacular. Okay. How do you change your tactics to ensure they don't become stale? I understand the Lincoln Project dropped in Florida and shifted to Arizona in 2020. What determined the shift? I'll tell you what determined the shift. We weren't seeing the results we needed. This is one thing I want to encourage Democratic campaigns to do. Become more agile. Do not dig in. Do not be stuck where you are and say, oh, we've got to do X because we've always done X. We've got to do this because we've always done that. If something's not working, as they say in writing, kill your darlings, move on. Okay. How do you identify and exploit the competition's vulnerabilities? How do you quickly identify those and take action? Well, folks, get yourself an opposition researcher that you can trust. You need folks who can go in and drill down, not just on what bills they passed or when they got a speeding ticket or or whether their child support payments are current. Those things are all mechanical. You need an opposition research person now who can dig into their head a little bit more, their psychology a little bit more. And that's something that, is hard to find. And we don't need it as much in this organization because we've basically been doing this for, a collective like 300 years or some ridiculous number. And of course, politics being dog years, I'm 1,000. But yeah, you need to, it is as important now to know about their finances and their background and their businesses as it is to understand who they are as a person, because so much of the war now is waged on social media, and it's hard for them to stay in character when they're being pounded on a psychological thing, which, Donald Trump could not stay in character. He could not pretend to even be a semi-president most of the time. So, all right, let's see. It seems that giving white suburban voters permission to refuse extreme elements of their traditional party will be key to holding the center in 2022. Yes, that is why we want to frame this race as a race about democracy. Because what does the end of democracy mean? Chaos, violence, political violence in particular. Those things are not what those suburban Republicans want. Now, I will also say to my Democratic friends, you know what suburban Republicans also want? They don't want massive lectures. They don't want to be told how bad they've been for so long. You need to ask them to go on a date with you. You're not asking them to move in. You're not shacking up. You're not getting married. You go on a date. It's an Airbnb, as Reed says. Come stay with us for a little while, then we'll move on separate ways. There's a nascent center-right movement in the country, and center-right, center-left movement in the country. It's not a party, but it's definitely an emergent thing, and they are going to be the people that decide this future. All right. Okay, I can't. That's a very long question. Most of us are former Republicans. We've never been defeated. Now, as Republicans, we face any number of against the odds fights. We know how to come from behind and never quit when we succeed. I know many of us are no longer Republicans. We can't be. That's been taken from us. We're the Americans who are former Republicans. I think there are a lot of ways to talk to former Republicans. And, Joe Biden did it in a lot of ways by just being Joe Biden, by being a decent figure, by being someone who was not going to be a jerk and cruel and an idiot, by being somebody who didn't revel in pain in others. I think that's important with a lot of these suburban Republicans. And again, framing this as the fight to prevent the dark from rising, framing this as a way to treat the preservation of democracy and the republic is enormously important. I also think that while a lot of traditionally conservative groups, Heritage, Claremont, Hillsdale, they have now converted themselves fully into nationalist alt-right propaganda outlets and Trump propaganda outlets. There are still a lot of Republicans who want to be left alone. They want to go and do their work. They want to be in their communities. They are gettable. They really are an addressable group. All right. Okay. I feel like I'm constantly saying the building's on fire to my progressive friends. They continue to focus on things that will do nothing to extinguish that fire. Or they sit and think of everything they can do except put out the fire. Or they turn the fire into a totally unnecessary inferno. The GOP jumps in and then comes out looking like the hero. Again, a little inter-party loyalty would go a long way. A little bit of reframing the way they make statements to the press would go a long way. So when AOC comes out and says, I don't like what Joe Biden did on this and this and this and this and this and this and this, she's feeding the Fox machine. She's feeding the Facebook machine. Instead, perhaps, call me crazy, I've only done this for 30 some years of my career, she should come out and say, I fully support President Biden, and I hope we can work together to achieve this and this and this. What a miracle that would be. Oh my God, a unified front? What an unusual thing. But Democrats should understand that a unified front is a great thing to have. Why are the Republicans seemingly so strong It's because they all say that the monkeys invented cotton candy. They all rely on that fundamental, discipline. When we were growing up in Republican politics, you know what the philosophy that motivated everything was? 3 words: just win, baby. Just win. Just win. Just win. A lot of that is by being an absolutely unified front and not letting the bad guys ever see any daylight on your side. So, if I were the squad, I'd go find a moderate Democrat somewhere and say, so-and-so is okay. We're not going to try to primary this person because we believe they've got the best chance to win. It would freak the Republicans the hell. They would lose their minds if you did that. How is it possible to effectively compete and combat the big money that sustains the big lie? One of the things that we do, and we are encouraging other Democratic groups to do and encouraging individual citizens to do, is hold corporations accountable for supporting insurrectionists, supporting the big lie promoters, supporting the people that supported this, the ludicrous construct that Donald Trump didn't get his ass handed to him in this election. We went after Toyota last year with a series of ads that were focused on 20 of their major dealerships. Those ads basically said, hey, by the way, if you walked on a Toyota lot anywhere in those areas, your phone pinged with an ad from us that said, by the way, did you know that Toyota's paying people who say that Black folks shouldn't be allowed to vote and that Black votes should be discounted in the 2020 election? They reversed their position in 7 hours. It was kind of remarkable. But you've got to burn these people hard and publicly. You've got to go after them and say, hey, you're funding this. You're promoting this. And it's possible to do that without having to spend the same amount of money they're spending. And one of the reasons that I think it's valuable to do it is the Republican Party needs about $150 million every quarter just to keep the boat afloat. If you cut out some of that money from the corporate side, you're really hurting them a lot. You're really, really hurting them a lot. And the reason that is because small dollar donations in the Trump side of the equation, the individual small dollar donors, there's a skim by this group called Win Red and by the Trump family and by all these other players and consultants. There's a skim of that money of about 50 to 55%. So they're raising a lot of money, but it's costing them a lot of money to raise it. So if you're hurting the corporate side and you're pressuring them, that is a really important thing. And one of the ways to pressure the corporate side is to make them live their stated values. When a company says we believe in diversity and inclusion, but they also support people who say that we should disqualify Black votes in Detroit and Philadelphia, then you put them in a position where their employees and their shareholders and their board members and their stakeholders across the board are in a lot of very painful areas. Do you ever talk to Democratic lawmakers, or have they ever asked for your advice? Yes, to both, and with a gratifying degree of frequency. And part of that is because one of my jobs used to be to kick their asses all the time, and we're all fighting on the same thing now, because look, I don't have to agree with any Democratic member of Congress or the Senate on any policy matter at all. I can disagree with them on a lot of things, and I do. But we agree on something more fundamental. We agree on something more protean. We agree on something more vastly more primal and important. And that's that if we don't work together now, there won't be another chance. There won't be a world where we work together, where we can get back to that fighting about policy and fighting about tax rates and fighting about carbon and fighting about gun control and fighting about all the things that a busy, big, messy democracy fights about. I don't mind the mess. I don't mind the chaos. I want a country that has these loud voices arguing passionately about big issues. That's what we should be doing. But if we don't win this fight now, if we don't do what we have to do now, if we don't face the reality of the moment we're in and face the reality of the dangers we see before us and work together to overcome those, I don't think the world works out in the way that any of us would hope it would. So with that, folks, I know we didn't get to all your questions. I know there are a lot of folks who had other questions. I am perfectly content. If you want to shoot me an email at rick@therickwilson.com, I'm happy to answer questions in that venue as well. I hope you got some interesting insights out of this tonight. I hope you got a few war stories out of it. I have more, but we've only got 90 minutes this evening. But I so appreciate the My5 Things folks having me here tonight. I appreciate each and every one of you coming to join us, and look forward to hearing from you on email. I'm also on Twitter at @TheRickWilson, as you may have noticed, where there will be more F-bombs. So thanks again, everybody, and have a great night.